Hello, everybody. All right, so we are at February 17th, 2023. The Raven Project has 50 forks and 479 stars and 56 watchers. We are in the midst of coming together. We are focusing on two things. One is governance, getting the project organized, and two, architecture, making sure that people understand it. Now, I have proposed using a consensus mechanism in order to organize everything. So, with that said, I just figured out how to pin conversations on the discussions tab. So there's a lot of questions and conversations around, should we use Discord? Should we use Slack? Should we use Matrix? Before we make those decisions, and certainly before we even make architectural decisions or roadmap decisions, we need to make decisions about how to make decisions. Because here's the thing. Artificial general intelligence, or artificial global intelligence, as I prefer to call it now, is too important to keep closed source or to keep totally behind closed doors. That being said, one thing that is emerging is that we do need some level of gatekeeping and governance. Just because someone has an internet connection does not mean that they are qualified to participate in the conversation. That being said, everyone should at least be able to see the conversation. We need to have transparency. We also need to have a pipeline to allow for an intake of ideas and also allow for healthy debate. So, with all that said, what I want to do is walk you through where we're at. So first, we had a couple of previous conversations. So I started with, proposed consensus mechanism with a comment deadline. So we started by commenting on okay, let's just talk about consensus. So we got quite a good amount of conversation around what even is consensus, what is the source material, so on and so forth. So we started by building some group awareness of consensus. We had some really good feedback. Like this guy, he talked about large-scale consensus. So we started building community awareness around even the idea of consensus. So then I wrote a proposal based on the book, which was here. So the book is Consensus Through Conversation. That's not the right one. Consensus process draft. There we go. So it's a 5-step process where you define the issue, you develop decision and acceptance criteria, you craft a proposal that meets those criteria, you test for consensus, and if you reject it, you craft a new proposal, and then finally you accept it if it passes consensus. So one of the things that people don't understand about consensus, and this is why we're going through this process, is yes, there is a vote for consensus, but it is not a simple majority vote. Ideally, with consensus, you negotiate and you work through until you get a proposal that has broad acceptance. That is the purpose of consensus, is so that you get a supermajority or ideally unanimous acceptance, because it is a form of collaborative decision making, which means that one, you're going to come up with better decisions than any single person could come up with. And we are seeing this process happen in real time. And so what I mean by that is after we had these initial discussions around consensus, as people were just getting ideas about it, then we said, okay, let's define the problem. And so we had 11 participants. It felt like more, but we had 11 people from the community participating and probably countless more watching. And so we discussed through okay, what are the actual problems? And people are talking about governance, like should we have a benevolent dictator model, or how do we even make decisions? And there was some comment drift, but we're talking about how do we steer this? How do we even organize? So that is where we discussed the problem space. We did start to discuss things like, okay, what are some possible solutions? And we started branching out. And this is the purpose of having a very slow and deliberate consensus process, because it takes time to bring ideas to the table. So people brought examples from other experiences and brought up concerns like, well, how does this even work, right? And how does this fit into how we're going to fund this, right? Is it, if it's open source, who's going to own the project? Are we going to have a primary stakeholder? I think it's going to be my startup. There's certainly enough energy and willpower inside my startup to take ownership of the Raven project and to keep it open source. We've had conversations with various stakeholders and even some venture capitalists who are familiar with open source projects. So we are attracting the interest that we need, but it's going to take some time to figure that out. That being said, we also need to talk, we talked about the scope. Where is consensus even going to be used? Is it just going to be to steer the development? Is it going to be to make business decisions? So on and so forth. So this is part one, which is discuss the problem space. So we had, you see how much discussion happened here. We had a lot of discussion around the problem of consensus and governance. So with that said, we have now moved to step 2. So I gave it 2 weeks to talk. We locked the previous conversation. So now we just started step 2. And it looks like we already have someone participating. So step 2 is we have to define the goalposts. What does it mean if to have a successful proposal? So basically, we are preparing to draft a proposal, and we say the proposal that we come up with must address these issues in this order or whatever. And so my initial decision or acceptance criteria is that our proposal must include specific tools and platforms that will guide the behavior that we need to see. So basically, when we were talking about the consensus problem, it was like, okay, GitHub is not enough, Discord is not enough, meetings, we haven't figured out how to schedule meetings yet. So we need a proposal that allows us to be asynchronous, because this is a global team. So we need it to be asynchronous, which means we need the right platforms. A bunch of people proposed a whole bunch of tools. Kialo and Lumio kind of percolated up to the top as really good tools to allow for decentralized and asynchronous debate and decision making. And then the second thing that I proposed is that our consensus proposal must include definitions, thresholds, and gatekeeping or otherwise qualifications, because we need to say like, okay, while we need transparency, we also need to make sure that the right people are at the table, and that people participating are qualified to participate. And then finally, we must establish the scope of consensus. Is this going to guide the entire project, or is this going to be within the container of just making technical decisions? Let's see. And then just 4 minutes ago, Sirianius added some ideas. We must include a plan for continuous improvement and adaptation. So basically, we need to evaluate consensus over time. I like that. The consensus proposal must establish guidelines for communication and information sharing. Excellent. I like it. So this is the process working. What we're creating is what's called a learning organization, where it is assumed that we are naive. And that's fine. But what we do is we create the structures that allow us to learn as we go and get smarter over time. So that's where we're at. All right, so let's put a pin in that. Consensus is happening. It's working. It's moving forward. There's a tremendous amount of energy around using existing tools like Kialo, Lumio, GitHub, whatever else to do consensus. But there's also some energy around using AI to help with consensus. And I'm really excited about that. I think that one of the things that we're going to ultimately do is create a new platform that will do all of this. That's my suspicion, and that's in the long run. We'll see what happens. There's talk about blockchain and all sorts of stuff. So we'll figure that out. Now, let's pivot over to architecture. So I figured out how to pin conversations. So what I did was I pinned the most important conversations that are happening. So one, this conversation was good, is just saying like, we have so much stuff going on. How do we even keep track of it all? So this will come up as another issue. Once we figure out consensus, then the next topic we're going to talk about on consensus, we're going to start talking about multiple topics. We're going to talk about the architecture, the MVP, the roadmap of Raven. We're also going to talk about our communication tools. Do we use Discord? Do we use Slack? Do we use Matrix? Do we use something else altogether, or none of the above? And then how do we organize all this stuff? All this is going to go through the consensus process, because we are smarter as a hive mind than as individuals making decisions. So on the architecture side, though, I what I did was I realized that pictures are good. If we can communicate the architecture very quickly and succinctly, that can allow people to get a good intuition. And diagrams are even better than videos in some respects because you can just look at it at a glance. So I created this, which is layers of abstraction. I need to update it. This is good, but this was also just a first draft. And then someone else from the community, let's see, where did it go? He put it somewhere. Hang on. I lost it. Let's go to the wiki because I know that it's over here. All right. So at the highest level, this is the simplest way to conceptualize the Raven architecture, where you have a nexus, a central microservice which serves as a data hub, and then you have a whole bunch of other microservices that only communicate with the nexus. So this is a star topology. This is the simplest possible architecture out there, which also means that you can just add an arbitrary number of microservices, all with a single point of contact, and that is the nexus. So then I added the layers of abstraction so that you can kind of get a more conceptual idea of, okay, here's how cognitive architecture is abstracted. And then finally, a community member read the books, looked at all that we were discussing, and created a very comprehensive functional architecture of how all the microservices could be organized. So this is incredible. And this is what I mean by the wisdom of the group. We get people contributing one idea at a time. It gets bolted on and incorporated, and we get smarter as a group. And so this is a phenomenal example of consensus working in real time. It is slow, and that is on purpose. So with that said, let's see. That was the architecture one. There are discussions around the hardware. So basically, you could run Raven on your phone or your desktop or your laptop or your tablet. We could also run Raven on smart home devices. So actually, let me show you the device that I created real quick. Okay, I think I've showed you guys this before, but basically this is like the original prototype of a Raven smart home device. So it's got a conference speaker and microphone. This microphone is really sensitive. It can pick up speech 30 plus feet away. So like basically across the house. Wide angle webcam so that Raven could hypothetically see, and then a touch screen so that if we give Raven an avatar or a face or at least an interface, so you say like, hey Raven, show me a recipe, like Raven could display the recipe here or whatever, and then you can't see it that well, but there's a Raspberry Pi on the back of this. We're discussing what is going to be in the hardware requirements. Now this requires a lot of architectural decisions, right? Where is it all going to run? And again, this is where consensus works, because it's like, okay, well, should we use Docker? Should we run everything in the cloud? Should we try and run stuff locally? And over time, we're starting to reach consensus that, okay, maybe the Raspberry Pi isn't strong enough because it can't run Docker containers, but maybe there is a system on a chip or a single board level computer that is powerful enough, or maybe we need a larger piece of equipment. If we offload it all to the cloud and then the Raspberry Pi is just a client, how would that work? So we're figuring out how to physically deploy it here. So this is a really good thread for that part. And then going back to the last discussion, which is this one, which is another good discussion, which is like, okay, well, how do we communicate everything? How do we bring people up to speed? Like there's so many decisions to be made. But again, this is all part of consensus. So I want to show you Kialo. There we go. Looks like, people are participating. This is great. So Kialo is really powerful in that it creates a graphical outline of the debate. And so here it's like, okay, we need this, and you see like arguments in support of and against ideas. All right, so let's go ahead and get in here. So there's, here's and this hasn't been formally adopted yet. This is just an exploration. But yeah, so you see it's a very, very structured and formalized way of debating where it's like, okay, so we need this, or let's try this other idea. and it's like, all right, well, this idea didn't get much support, but this other idea has a lot of support with a lot of pros and cons. So there you go. This is how Kialo works. How do I get back to the other ones? Those are not mine. My own? Following? Overview? Anyways, so basically that's just one possible tool. And if we create a team account or a web page or something where we can keep track of all these issues, that is something that we can look at. Anyways, I think I'm running out of steam. I think you get the idea. We are making decisions. We are building team learning, a greater understanding of how to come together. So yeah, that's that. I think that's about it for today. So yeah, thanks for watching and thanks for participating, everyone. Take care and feel free to jump in.